Welcome to the Smart2move Dual Force Plate certification. My name is Tyler Watson and I'm the Director of Sales for Smart2move here in the Americas. And with me I have Dr. Tyler Standerford, who is the Director of Science and Education here in the Americas. We're here in beautiful Highland, Utah, as well as in Dr. Tyler's lab at Utah Valley University. Dr. Tyler, would you mind just explaining kind of what to expect from this education content?
Yeah, we're excited to be able to bring you this education. And as Tyler brought up, right, we're going to be a little bit in the lab, a little bit outside to really show you the nature of these force plates, the portability that we can really take them anywhere and use them to assess golfers in the way they use ground reaction forces. What we hope to accomplish in this education is a couple of things. First, we want to get you comfortable with some of the terminology that you are going to hear a lot, that you might read a lot when it comes to ground reaction forces and torques and pressures and frontal plane rotational forces and all that stuff. We want to help you understand what that actually means. We want to really take you in the app so that if you have these force plates, you know how to step right in after you collect data on your golfer and be able to look and assess exactly what those numbers mean, what the curves mean, what the vectors mean, so that you can help that player get the most out of their training and out of their lessons that they take with you. And that kind of brings us to the last point of the education. We want to give you just a little bit of information about how to correct some of these things. We're going to talk quite a bit about what we call the performance pie, where we're going to go into a little bit on how a golfer utilizes different aspects of the ground reaction force and how you can assess that and then step in and correct those things as needed to help that golfer play better and enjoy the game of golf. Now, Tyler, this isn't meant to be an all-encompassing research focus on every single thing about ground reaction force, right?
Absolutely. We hope to create a lot more content where we dig into advanced topics on maybe fitness and training, coaching, and so on, that will allow everyone to progress and get better and better using their force plates, allowing them to help their students more ultimately.
Yeah, we hope that at the end of this education, you have some wonderful tools in your toolkit to be able to analyze ground reaction force, be more comfortable collecting the data, and stepping in to help your golfers generate better ground reaction forces, better motion with their body, and even influence the club and the ball where it matters the very most.
Absolutely. I think the first thing we're going to hop in is and just talk about biomechanics, a word we hear often said, and we're going to help put some definition to that and make a little bit more sense of it.
Here we are in my biomechanics lab, and as a biomechanics professor, I get to talk and study every day about biomechanics. You may not be familiar with all the terms that we're going to cover in this certification content, and so I want to give you just a little bit of a high-level view of what biomechanics is and why we care about it as it relates to sport and motion and human performance. Biomechanics is literally the study of human motion and the associated forces that cause that motion. Now, when we talk about biomechanics, typically we can look at two different types of information. We can look at what we call kinematics, and we can also look at kinetics. Now, kinematics is the study of that actual motion. It's terminology like displacement and distance, velocity and speed, acceleration. We might look at the center of mass of an individual and describe how it moves throughout human motion, throughout sport motion. Those would all be things that describe the motion that we're seeing in that athlete or that individual that we're studying. The second aspect of biomechanics that we can talk about are called kinetics. Now, kinetics are the actual forces and torques that actually cause that motion that we're studying. Now, the big one that we'll talk a lot about in this certification is ground reaction force. Ground reaction force is literally a reactionary force following the principle of Newton's third law that comes from the internal forces of our muscles. As I push on the ground and interact with the ground, that ground's going to push back on me as a result of those internal forces from my body. It will be equal and opposite to the way that I push on the ground. That's our ground reaction force. Another aspect that we talk about is what we call torque. Now, torque is just the rotational effect of those forces. So anytime we see an individual or person creating any type of rotation or spinning motions, flips and cartwheels and rotations, those are caused by torques. And torques are a product of two things. How much force can that person produce? And what is the distance of that force from an axis of rotation? That's an example of kinetics. And again, we'll get into a lot more detail on ground reaction force and torques in subsequent videos and go into a lot of detail on these topics. Another thing that we can look at in kinetics as it relates to forces and torques is something that we call impulse. Now, impulse is just how is this force applied over a period of time? We don't just apply force and it's quickly on and quickly off. We tend to build up that force and utilize this principle of impulse, or force applied over time, to create large changes in the quantity of our motion. And that's something that we'll study a lot as we go throughout this certification. Another one that we'll talk about is this idea of rate of force development. This is how quickly or slowly an athlete or individual can turn on and off their force. How quickly can they build up that force to jump high up in the air, to even just stand up out of a chair. And those things are really important to the kinetics piece of biomechanics. And again, the kinetics is what actually creates the kinematics. So as we start to see a center of mass change and shift, that is coming as a direct result of the forces and torques that that individual is applying on the system. Force creates that motion. And that's something that we're eager to educate you about in this certification. The question kind of becomes, well then, why do we even study biomechanics? What's the benefit of it? And I've seen for countless years as I've studied it, a couple of key benefits. The first one is to just help your athletes avoid injury. If you can start to understand how they're moving and how they might be putting themselves in positions that might be detrimental to their body, we can step in and actually measure things and then correct motion. That's a powerful thing for injury prevention. Another big piece of it is improving performance. As I watch how an athlete pushes on the ground, as I watch how that ground reaction force then displaces their center of mass and creates velocities and accelerations in their system, I can actually step in and say, man, if I want you to jump a little higher, if I want you to swing a golf club a little bit faster, if you push on the ground a little bit differently at this point in the swing, or with a little bit more force during this part of your jump, you're actually going to move even better, even faster, even more efficiently. Right? Those are really incredible pieces of biomechanics. So improving that performance, decreasing injury, and I love that we get to put some measurable quantities to these things. That's the power of biomechanics. It's in the numbers. It allows us to step in and actually measure things, not just guess, but really look at what an athlete is doing so that we can step in and know exactly where to correct their forces, which will influence their motion and create the most powerful, efficient athletes who are less susceptible to injuries. Very excited to walk you through this certification and help educate you on some of these principles that will help you get the very most out of your force plates and help your players play better golf.